Well, welcome back, everyone. As Mark said, my name is Christina Koch, and I'm one of the staff members at the Center for High Throughput Computing. And as Todd mentioned in his talk, my talk this afternoon is about new features in Condor 9.0 that are, and I'm going to focus on things that we think are of a special interest to users. And so the title of this talk is why you might want to convince your local administrator to upgrade HTCondor, because these features are going to be useful to you. So we'll run through a couple use cases, give it a couple examples, and hopefully have some time at the end for questions. So our first big use case is that you're a person that has data in the cloud, represented here by a couple different resources that provide data storage in the cloud. And let's start my timer here. The big news is over the past several minor versions of Condor, and now sort of in full glory in 9.0, are improved file transfer plugins for handling files from Box, Amazon S3, Google Drive. There's all kinds of different data sources. And we really see this as a benefit for people who might be on an access point with limited storage space. So it's more convenient to have your data somewhere else, where you want to access pieces of a data set when you don't want to have to move the whole thing to the compute system you're using. And if you're sharing data on these resources, and it's convenient to put your data there so that it's accessible to collaborators or someone else you're working with. So this is really cool set of new plugins, new features. There's some manual pages linked on this slide that you're welcome to peruse later if you look at these slides. I've also included a quick example of what the syntax can look like in the submit file for using these plugins. So you have to enable the services. If you're using an authenticated service, there's some work that has to be done behind the scenes to make sure you get that access. But once that's done, use these options and then the plugin name and the file to be accessed. And this does work for input and output. You can also bring your own plugin. So this has always been the case from the administrative side, but now users can do it too, where you can have a custom plugin that you've written, for example, list it in your submit file and then use it to transfer your files. So our next case is if you're a person who uses GPUs and want to know a little bit more about what's happening on the GPU behind the scenes, the job log file now includes GPU utilization information along with the CPU's memory and disk that's always been there. This information is now also in the job ad, so it can be queried using Condor history and Condor Q. GPUs, just as a side note, also work with containers. And there's more improvements coming in the future. All right, next up, we have someone who's just submitting jobs and would like to have a little more information about what's happening as their jobs are starting and running. And we have a new tool called Condor Watch Queue. It's a more efficient way of running something like Watch Condor Queue. That's, yeah, just a little less intensive, not so hard on the sched, and gives you this nice little interactive display of the status of your jobs and what's running, what's idle, what's on hold. Man page link on the slide. Just along similar lines, if you're interested in data about how long your file transfers are taking to and from jobs, input and output files, that information is also now stored in the job log. An example of what it looks like is shown here. All right. HTCondor 9.0 also has some new features for checkpointing jobs. So specifically people who've written jobs that are self-checkpointing and can periodically save their output and can restart from that saved output. So one of the new features is this job attribute called the checkpoint exit code, which can be set to a predetermined number. And if your job or your executable kind of basically periodically writes checkpoints and then exits with the specified code that triggers that the files you've created, the checkpoint files, will be copied back to your access point, but the job will stay in the queue and keep running. So it's a way to make things a bit more robust in terms of checkpoint files being continuously saved in a more safe place than the execute node, but automating this sort of like continuing to run until the executable actually finishes, exits with a normal exit code, and then things complete as normal. And there's a really nice write-up of how to do this in the Condor manual at this link. I think there's another tool related to checkpointing, which would be quite handy if you were using the previous feature. And this tool is called Condor Evicted Files, and it allows you to look at the spool, or what the preserved files from an eviction more easily. So previously, a job gets evicted, files that are being saved, the sandbox files, go to the spool location, but they were hard to access or check on. And so this tool gives a way to do that. All right, circling back around to containers. If you were using containers and want to work with them interactively, container jobs. First, this is a quick reminder that Condor does support using container jobs. So there's an example submit file of the appropriate submit file options shown here for using Docker containers. But you can now work with containers interactively, not just in a batch way. You can submit an interactive job using Condor submit and the interactive flag, and then a submit file that uses a container. Or if you've submitted a container job and you want to connect to it and see how things are going, you can use Condor SSH2 job as you would with any other kind of vanilla universe job. Bindings now support Dagman and Condor Chirp, and there's some links to that in these slides. There's an example of what that code would look like on the right, pulled from one of the tutorials that's listed on this slide. And just in general, there's been a lot of improvements, kind of things have been smoothed out and made a little more clean in the HTCondor Python bindings. It's been upgraded to Python 3. So if you are a Python fan and have been interested in trying this out, but haven't yet, or if you're someone who uses the Python bindings already, you can now feel good about these improvements and maybe try some of these new features. Okay, I think that's Python. And then finally, we have our user who uses Dagman. And specifically, instead of having a DAG file that references other submit files, just wants to have one file, a DAG file. And this is now possible. Submit descriptions can be included inline in a DAG file, removing the need for an additional submit file. And so there's an example of what that syntax looks like here. So it's basically our same submit file format contained in curly braces instead of having the name of an external submit file, which is what would normally be here. And coming soon, you'll be able to use this kind of inline submit description, not just with a single job node in a DAG, but across multiple job nodes. I think we had another couple Dagman notes. Yep. Dagman can now optionally run a script when a job goes on hold. For example, if you would send yourself an email. And kind of related to this, DAGs will soon be able to submit jobs on hold, and this might be useful if you had a lot of failures or retries of a particular job, and you want it to somehow stay in the queue but not run. That's how that mechanism, I think, is expected to work. So stay tuned. And you can also change some DAG-man throttles while a DAG is running. And so these can be limits on how many jobs are submitted or how many are idle. And obviously you want to have the best estimates you can before you submit jobs, but if things change, you now have that flexibility to change those on the fly, and the running DAG will reflect those changes. All right. I think that was it for features that we hope users will find useful and might be kind of motivating to upgrade your own or bug your administrator, upgrade your local HTCondor pool.